Okay, so we're going to talk about three plays today. So we'll talk about Long and Long Ago, Whispers Antiphonal, and As If a Promontory. I think out of these three plays, one is inarguably great. The other two have their arguments too. I thought that Long and Long Ago was the best of them. And then I would say As If a Promontory. And then Whispers Antiphonal, that's the one that I'm most unsure of. Don Moss had recently given me some criticism of my poems, and he said that some of the lines left him wondering, and some of the stuff in this play left me wondering too. Not that I don't think that there's some merit, but I just wanted your opinion on that before we proceed through each individual play.
Well, yeah, I'd probably rank them similarly. The two plays, though, that you're talking about, the better ones, are both comedies, and the shorter middle one is the fourth of the big four plays, and that's about the girl I knew the least of and knew the least amount of time, and I totally switched it around from the three other plays because she's the narrator, not Danny Wagner.
I thought it was the weakest of the four plays too.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah.
But
it seemed to me like that one is. I don't think it's as good of a play, but this Unalterable Animal, it's sort of a play in verse, and it's not as if there isn't great writing in it because you excerpt a lot of your other stuff, but it just seemed to me to be more experimental, like the Honey of Common Summer, one of those plays.
Although I think it's better than those because I'm 30 or 40 plays beyond those.
Yeah. I don't know about this Unalterable Animal though. I felt that one was a lot stronger, and I was questioning the whispers, how that would play on stage, especially since there's such specific excerpts where if they were whispered, the audience may not be able to hear anything and be able to get into the memory of it all with the telephone hanging. So that one, I mean, I thought was the weakest of them, but I mean, you have enough there where, like, I mean, the title describes what's going on. You don't know exactly what is the whispers, whether it's the girlfriend or the whisper stage direction that is antiphonal. You have some interesting combinations there, but I did feel that one was the least in depth. The Long and Long Ago, that one reminded me of, I just rewatched Nashville, so it's sort of a bit of serendipity, but that one reminded me of a deeper Altman film, since it seems very ensemble, and there's pockets of conversation throughout the whole thing. It's also a very funny play. You have Hicksville Darla and then Aunt Darla, and Aunt Darla has probably one of the funniest moments where she's arguing, and they're talking about the show Password, and she says that I forget who's arguing with her, but they say that she doesn't read at all, and she says that she watches this Password, and she continues to be interrogated and says that, well, is she reading Password? Then she is reading.
Yeah. Well, this is basically, in a sense, a direct sequel or prequel, actually, to my second play, which was If God Were Alive, because it's basically the same cast of characters, minus a few people. That was set in 76, I think, 75, 76. This is set in 1969. This is a play all about 1969, 50 years ago.
And you're 4 years old in the bulk of it.
Well, there's two Dannys. There's the 54-year-old Danny and the 4-year-old Danny. Although the 4-year-old Danny is a bit of a cheat because even though I was bright and outgoing as a kid, there are certainly things where I act more like a 6 or 7-year-old version of Danny, more like what gets Pastor Stagey. But that was just for dramatic necessity.
Yeah. He seems to know a lot more as a 4-year-old than any 4-year-old could possibly know.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting. There's a scene too where Danny steals a camera and he's chasing. He's being chased by this other kid, Tommy, and the older Danny is standing monologuing while the other two kids are going back and forth between him. Then the older Danny sort of has a Bugs Bunny moment where he goes and points Tommy in the wrong direction while the younger Danny gets away.
Yeah. Well, that whole scene, actually, we find out, because this is the third play where cousin Joey Strowman appears. He was in If God Were Alive, and then he was in the musical where he did the Welcome Back, Kotter song with Danny. And so this is set, around the same time that Joey's come home from a stint in West Germany, in the army or whatever he was in, and Tommy, the other kid, Tommy and Janie are the cousins on Joey's paternal side, whereas I was the cousin on the maternal side. I'm related to Aunt Darla, and so anyway, yeah, and it turns out that Joey gave Danny the camera, and and Tommy is trying to boink this girl under the boardwalk, and Danny catches him literally with his pants down and whatnot, and takes a photo. And through 3 or 4 scenes, all we see is Danny running with the camera, and Tommy, who I guess cuts his foot on a seashell or something, is limping along trying to catch him. And it finally gets resolved that Joey is behind it, and he's trying to blackmail Tommy to set him up with Tommy's girlfriend's older sister.
I also thought that well, talk about a little bit of the Altman comparison. Did you do you see that reference in there?
Well, I mean, it's a complex play. I mean, my characters obviously are more developed than you're going to get in any film.
They're set into sort of musical movements.
Yeah.
One of them I thought was pretty palpable were the interview sections where Danny asks his dad a question and his dad answers it.
Yeah.
And it sets it up for when Danny asks his dad about if he's going to die or not.
Yeah. Well, you haven't mentioned yet, but there are 2 types of scenes. There's the Alger scenes and the Olga scenes.
And there's the interview scenes too.
Yeah. So I mean, Alger is the more lighthearted scenes from Horatio Alger, who was a 19th century American writer who used to write all these stories about hard work and fairness and being good pays off in the end. And then Nelson Algren was a 20th century short story writer. His most famous work is probably The Man with the Golden Arm, about a heroin addict, and it was one of Frank Sinatra's better roles as an actor. And so you have these differences. So it's sort of a little bit like when I had the Vincetti brothers, and we'd have the scenes named after the 3 brothers, and then just the numeric scenes.
Mm. That's an interesting comparison too. I had not thought of the Vincetti brothers in at any point throughout the whole play. Talk a little bit about the Darla's return. I think is this her first play back since If God Were Alive?
She has a small role, if you remember, with my mom in the play where I forget the names of my plays. The play where my mom is dying, her last 17 days. So she has a one brief scene. But this is Aunt Darla back being her Darla-like self, and she was a small-minded busybody, gossip, and bigot and whatnot. But she wasn't. And having said that, I don't think she was a really bad person, but she was a product of her age, and the delineation between Eddie, my dad, her brother, and her is drawn here quite well. They don't seem to be very much like siblings. They seem to have been raised very differently. Eddie isn't well educated, but he's decent and he has a good sense of people. Darla is very self-centered, and here we even see throughout everyone seems to be against Darla. My mom has a moment or so where she speaks up against Darla. Hicksville Aunt Darla separates herself from regular Aunt Darla. Darla aligns herself with my uncle Joe's younger brother Pat, who's an outright bigot. We get some other people, the Myers and their children. Danny again is drooling over cousin Janie, even though technically she's not the cousin. She's the sweet 16-year-old blonde with a body.
Anything sugar.
Yeah, and So there's a lot of little things that go on. It's a portrait. I mean, it's called, what the hell is the long title here?
But from Continent's End in the Jefferson poem,
Is it
not
what?
long ago.
Yeah, it's from Continent's End, but so the subtitle is a symphonic vocal reification of Jones Beach, USA, and other things in New York in 1969. So a lot of it is set on the beach, although not all of it. Some of it is set in Salisbury Park, which later became Eisenhower Park, and it's these people keep meeting up. These are the friends and family of my parents. And we get the what was then called the generation gap between the teenagers and the young people and the older people. We get my obviously the for me the two real funny scenes. There's an undercurrent of the family tensions that run between things, between the two Darlas who argue, between uh, uh, Eddie and his sister. There's the scenes where they're always saying, "Give Danny some peanuts" or something. Uh, and but the two to me the two really standout comic things are the scene where Danny's being chased constantly by Tommy after having taken photo of him, and then there's the UFO incident.
Yes, with the aliens. Describe that scene.
Well, literally when I was a kid, there was this girl named Claire. She's called Claire Meyer in the book, and there's this kid. There's a photo somewhere of me, Claire, and this Italian kid who was a little older, and he was a dumb shit. I call him Mitch in the play, and I remember that we were playing on monkey bars and whatnot. It was in Salisbury Park, and I remember the sun going down, and then maybe about 15, 20 minutes as the thing started to get dark. I remember it seemed to be like what I called a second sunrise. And I forgot about it. And then I remember the three of us sort of like sitting in the sand, waking up like, what happened and whatnot. Now, years later, 20 years later, 15, 20 years later, whenever it came out, there's a book called Intruders and then Missing Time. And I wondered in the late 80s, early 90s, when I first read this book, I wondered if that had been a UFO and maybe us three had been kidnapped. Now, I don't believe that, but it made for a good entree. And so this sort of is like the UFO scene in Woody Allen's Stardust Memories too, where the aliens come and I'm looking for meaning. You tell funny jokes, that kind of thing. And so I wanted to have the 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 three kids. All of a sudden they get kidnapped and whatnot. And it's dark, and this is where Danny clearly isn't a 4-year-old, but almost a preternatural being. And Danny's saying, "We'll sell you the dumb one. Just let us go." and Mitch apparently is getting prodded. The stage is black, but he's getting probably things shoved up or into his orifices. And Claire wants Danny to do something, and one of the aliens steps on the other alien's Schlev car, and Danny says, "Look for a Schlev car." And apparently Claire steps on his foot and says, "That's not a Schlev car." you know.
I thought some of the funnier scenes were when Danny was repeatedly mocking Aunt Darla by saying, "Oh, phooey," and then her husband joins in and starts saying, "Oh, phooey," and dismissing everything Aunt Darla says, as well as the Slaughterhouse Five conversation where it's sort of like the blind men and the elephant, where all of them think that Slaughterhouse Five is something else instead of what Slaughterhouse Five is.
Well, yeah, and there's lots of funny scenes. Darla gets marginalized. There's a scene early on, I guess, where Darla, I guess it's, I don't think it was 69. It might have been 71 or 72 that the real life Aunt Darla had to have a mastectomy or a lumpectomy at the time, and my mom said that she liked the Aunt Darla, the real Aunt Darla, a bit more when she was like that. So I tried to humanize her a bit there, but then she's still putting people down, and she'll
she apologizes in her way to your mom.
Yeah, by saying that Helen should apologize and whatnot, but there's
you forget that Danny comes along with her. it sort of makes things worse.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think here because it's been a few months since I finished this. Uh, and one of the things too, when I do those, there are some sections where I have sort of we just the lights go down and then we hear an audio replay of what was said, and
Yeah, yeah.
this is one of those things
Oh,
that
strobe
what
section, right?
the what?
The strobe
Yeah, the
section.
strobes,
Yeah,
uh, and we get Danny talk. He talks about Pastor Stagian. You know, Pastor Stagian's pretty boring. And this is before my sister Christine was adopted or even born. Maybe some of the scenes, so she's not there like with in the musical. But yeah, it's a
there is
little.
a scene though where your mom and dad find out that they are going to get Christine. I don't
Yeah,
think she's named, but they say that they are about to get a little girl.
yeah,
That's a good scene between Eddie and Helen.
yeah. Uh, and then we get a lot of scenes that could be from like a Norman Lear comedy. It's usually Pat and Darla, the regular Aunt Darla, not his wife Darla, but Pat and Darla against everyone else. They're sort of the most right wing. And Uncle Joe, who apparently has been a Wall Street Republican for most of his life, apparently has softened in his old age and is getting more liberal. And Darla doesn't particularly like this. And so, I mean, these are characters that are well sketched out. They're put into scenes that are for the most part believable, except for the more comic scenes, I guess. But even though those work, we get, like I said, we get Danny. We see the older version of Danny narrating, but we see how Danny becomes Danny because even as a kid, I remember my cousin Janie. I just remember seeing the first time I saw her in a bikini. You know, I being 4 or 5 years old, going, being like, "Whoa, uh, uh, I like that," and I might not even know why I like that, but Janie had curves, and so now she'd be pushing 70. But
Okay. I also think that the opening sections and then the ending sections where you have the scene and then you get on stage, you just get the characters monologuing about something and then cutting to a different character. And I think it's the older Danny, the younger Danny, Eddie, Helen, and Darla all get their monologues, and then they shift back to the sounds of the sea and darkness. And I thought that was a very effective opening and closing.
and there's also from Woody Allen that I took that
Yeah,
the opening,
from Interior.
yeah, interiors, and then also did the end because I wanted since it's about Jones Beach. When I was a kid, Jones Beach was where everyone went to twice a month, maybe on the weekends. Salisbury Park would be the spring and the fall when it got a little cooler. And then I remember sometime in the 73, 74, Jones Beach got too expensive and they had to go to Nassau County Beach. But then uh, my dad had some of those other people fake give him their addresses so that they could we could get a fake ID so that we could go use that beach too. But
I think your dad has a poetic moment where he talks about how even though they live right next to Jones Beach, for most New Yorkers, it's been decades since they've been there. Not years, but decades.
oh yeah, and that's true. That's one of the things about New York is that New York is very much it. It's really like if you smush 200 small villages together, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and people, you could literally live somewhere like I lived in Glendale, and let's say where the Mets played in Old Shea Stadium, or now Citi Field, the New York Mets baseball team, is really only about, I don't think it's more than 6 or 7 miles, but it's straight up. You have to go through 3 or 4 other neighborhoods. Driving is a pain in the ass. It might take you 45, 50 minutes to just go 6 or 7 miles. So people in New York don't do that generally. You would take a train to go to Shea Stadium if you're going to go. And a lot of people just don't go anyway. But I'm trying to think. Let me just ask you, what characters stood out for you reading the play?
Uh, The characters well, there was the younger Danny, Darla, and Eddie. I thought those were the best defined characters. Joe was an interesting character too. And then I did like Mitch's Maronia throughout most of the play.
Well, he's only in one scene, but
Well, he makes such a men bro. I think he's in a couple scenes actually, but he makes such an impression with how dumb he is and how he's easily uh, dispatched by a 4-year-old
yeah.
that no one can forget that.
Well, he's not even dispatched because he doesn't even realize that he's been dispatched. You know,
There's an extra level to his stupidity.
yeah, he's sort of because in the end he's like because he's like he keeps calling Danny the wrong name. He can't even remember Danny's name. You know, it's like hey Petey or whatever he calls Danny. And then he thinks that the Danny is the younger brother of the girl and whatnot. But again, this is a good example, and we would just so people who watch this, Peter and I were talking earlier before we recorded about uh, writing and some of his writing and whatnot, things to do with. This is a good example, this play, of where I could probably have taken, I could have split these incidents up and used them within 3, 4, 5, maybe other plays. But by putting them together in sort of this, you might call mega play, and I think it's like 46, 47,000 words long. So it's my third or fourth longest play, and it's longer than all but one of O'Neill's plays, I think. Um, but this is where you sometimes length can be too much, but sometimes by having these little moments that are not particularly deep or not particularly memorable alone, when you stack them up, if you put the building blocks together in the right way, you get a synergy that the whole thing is much more. And I think this is a good example. The whole thing is much more than you might think it was, because the thrust of the play is comic. But at the end, when you get back, when you start with the ways and the monologues and end with the ways and the monologues, it gives a sort of nice dramatic frame to hold the rest of the comedic stuff, which then makes the comedy seem even better and more poignant. Because while there are comedic moments, there are little bits of moments. Danny tells his Aunt Darla that he loves her, and you can tell that he really means it. But he's also working her to get an angle too. And Aunt Darla feels it and needs to know that to hear those words. But she also seems to know that Danny is a budding little con man, at least to her. And you can see little bits of Danny maybe a few years later with the two wacky sisters that play, and you can see how Danny could go. And so these are plays like this, or the one I just mentioned with the two wacky
I
sisters.
will say I immensely prefer the plays where Danny is a minor character, and I'll just
Yeah.
explain why.
Yeah, I was going to say
I,
that too. Minor
I,
also as a child and
because
small
when it
role.
is focused on Danny, there's I think it works as a dramatic device, but it's almost like he's rewriting his history, and everyone is praising him for his giant intellect and things like that. Stuff that probably didn't happen in reality because people are not that perceptive to intelligence. But I think that it works as a better character because it's almost as if, like with the two sisters play, you can look out of uh, their perspective and see more frailty in them and see more complexity. Whereas with Danny, it's not like a monochrome painting or anything, but it's sort of just his perspective and how everyone is coming to him and saying what a great guy Danny is. I just feel there's a little more hagiography in his rewriting of his history than there is with the characters where he's a secondary character as opposed to the main character.
Well, yeah, and like I just said, I prefer my favorite plays just emotionally are things like the musical where Danny is a central character, but not necessarily the main character.
Mhm.
His battle with Pastor Stagey, when Danny is uh, mysteriously going on errands for the old crazy lady and bringing her stuff back. What's he doing? What's he? Uh, And so yeah, I prefer them too. But you know, some of them just, you know, obviously if I'm writing about girls that I knew, I can't. You know, Danny has to be more central, and it's not that I like. I mean, I enjoy writing. I don't mind writing about myself or my versions of myself, but this isn't a Norwegian in the family where Manny Cole can be an important but still a background character. Um, uh, if you know the next two plays we're talking about, Danny has a bigger role because he's an adult there with. You know, or at least a teenager in one play and then an adult in the other. Whereas here he's an adult looking back and encountering his younger version who has more screen time or more stage time than he does. But yeah, I do. I said that. Yeah, I like that more.